I feel like it wouldn't be a podcast intro without mentioning New Drake.
I'll laugh, not cry later. The GOAT. The funny part has been like everybody just like slowly turning to a camera and saying baby, like randomly.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, man.
My boys text me in a group chat and like I was just like talking shit. And then I put like dot 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 baby.
Baby. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Without a Roadmap. This is the podcast for product folks who get the job done but are still figuring it out. My name is Jonas, joined here by my co-host, Cam. I don't have an adjective for you this week.
I was about to say, it's all good though.
You just Cam this week.
Just Cam for today. I like it. Today, we want to talk about some of like the ideation process and kind of how we've been thinking about gathering requirements, because we are about to start one of our next like major pillars in the Parlor product. And we almost got ahead of ourselves by just rushing into designs and prototyping and handing stuff off to our engineers to get it developed. But then luckily, our fearless leader, Keith, said we should take a step back and really think through how the entire system will work before we jump into some new features and have to change things later on that we don't like. So today, I think we're gonna walk through a framework that Jonas found and kind of just do some brief convos about it and see what we like about it, what we don't like about it, and yeah.
Yeah, and I figured it might be worth doing this because, like Cam said, we did jump into this new pillar really excited and, feeling like we knew exactly what the next steps were going to be and what we needed to build. And what actually happened was it, forced us to actually waste some time, spend time designing, prototyping the wrong thing. And as a result, kind of pushing our timelines back a bit, I figured that, this is something that we could potentially improve. So yeah, like I figured it might be a nice time to look at some other popular frameworks for the ideation process, kind of what the best practices are, and, kind of hear our thoughts on it and, see what we can take from it.
Let's do it.
Okay. So just went on to Google University and searched up a quick feature ideation framework. We're taking this from the toolkit.mozilla.org, and so shout out to them. If you find this of any use, we'll make sure to include the link in the description somewhere.
This is not an ad.
No, they just have good SEO. So this is one of the first ones that I came across. I was like, okay, this looks different, interesting. So it's something that I see in a lot of, these sorts of frameworks is kind of a outline of how to kind of format it. And, I think that product folks are pretty common or, pretty familiar with using Post-it notes. So that's one of the things that they're saying here. You should prepare yourself with. I'm curious your thoughts on that, Cam, in like in the world of like virtual product discussions, like what is our version of a Post-it note right now?
I think it's the Miro whiteboard stuff. I showed in our meeting last week. I think they actually have like Post-it notes, like a visualization for it. So like, I think that's like probably the one thing. I do think it's super valuable just because instead of just like reading off like a Notion document or in Slack, it's helpful to just see like the different like features you kind of want to try to hit or different things you want to try to deliver on.
Right. Yeah. So in this case, I think it's mostly for putting ideas up and, just having them as a visual aid for the conversation. So it does, give us a little bit of an introduction. It says that this should take 30 minutes to an hour, recommends 3 to 6 participants. It gave a difficulty rating of medium, which I'm not quite sure what that's based on, but I guess we'll see. So let's jump into it. So it's broken down into 4 different steps. We have the prep step, the frame step, the initiate step, and finally the think step, which is broken up into two parts. There's divergent thinking and convergent thinking. So keeping starting up from the top, they're recommending that you spend 30 to 60 minutes prepping for the session. So the prep looks like it involves, investing some time to make sure that everybody in the group has kind of the information necessary to kind of provide information, or to continue the conversation around whatever product strategy or feature ideation that you're working on. I guess that makes a lot of sense. I imagine if you're a product person on the product team, you at least have a base level understanding of
Right.
the topic at hand.
Yeah. I
And,
think like for stuff like this, I think they do a really good job of saying everybody needs to have like the base understanding of the user's needs. And I think the bigger thing is your product strategy. Like if the different people on the call or in the session, whether they're on the product team, the customer facing, on the marketing team, um, I think it's super helpful to have everybody on the same page in terms of like the product strategy. Like for us, I think we're still trying, like we have an idea of what it is. Like we say it, but it's not really ingrained in all four of us yet. I think we all have different kind of views on some strategy stuff. So I think that's one thing we definitely need to improve on, but providing the context of like what's the story we're trying to solve in terms of like the user needs. All right, we want them to be able to do this, this, and this, and this is the workflow, and then combining that with your strategy in terms of I was reading an article the other day about like Google strategy. Like in the early days, it was like simple, fast, and powerful. Like those are like the three words they defined it. So every feature they built had to follow those three words. So if they built a feature that where the performance was like 200 milliseconds, they wouldn't release it. They wouldn't release into it until they got down to what their standard was, which was 100 milliseconds for every interaction. So they were saying that they got to like the literally the finish line of like a couple of big features, and the performance wasn't there, so they just didn't release it. They went back to the drawing board and did the whole thing over again.
got it. So you kind of have to understand your company's overarching, business strategy and business goals in order to kind of, take part in one of these sessions, and, at least to provide, insights that are going to be valuable, and, kind of save time, going over things that
Yeah.
might not fit within those
Instead of
constraints.
going on like tangents that
Yeah.
can go for like an hour.
Which we're very good at.
Yeah.
uh, So it also mentions that there should be an individual facilitator, and that facilitator should kick off the brainstorm, obviously participate, but manage the conversation. But their main role is to steer the conversation back to the specific user traits and user needs in question. I'm curious, like, do you feel like we ever really assign a one individual facilitator when we have these internal conversations?
Not really. No, there's only
Is there a
four of
need?
us. So yeah, there's only four of us. So it's kind of on the product side. So we kind of look at that way. But I do think we're starting to get into that where either you or myself or Keith is kind of providing the context into what and why we're doing this.
Hmm.
And then from there, everyone else chimes in. And then I think we probably need to do a better job of always trying to come back to like the user need or the workflow we're trying to solve for or create in terms of instead of just always branching off to all the things we could do.
Yeah, yeah. I think assigning a facilitator for those conversations is actually a good idea, because in a lot of cases it's not going to be, Keith, our CEO and product visionary. Sometimes, one of us is kind of more empathetic to the user needs or the ideal use case for, a proposed, feature that we're looking
Exactly.
to ideate on. So I think that's something we can, bring up, just to make sure that we're always coming back to, coming back and understanding the reason that we're building something, and
Right.
because that is something that got away from us recently.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Okay, moving on. Step two. This is framing the conversation. So this process involves introducing your target user and the need you're trying to solve. So they break this into two different, main points here. First one, characterizing your target user in a textured and non-stereotypical way. So curious your thoughts on that, Cam. What do they mean by texture? Are these users? Are they ashy? Do they have rough skin?
That's what I was trying to figure out. And the textured I guess, are they trying to get at like personas maybe?
I think that's a part of it. My guess is that characterizing the user in a way that where it's not loosely or not very strictly defined. So I think the textured is kind of trying to keep in mind that there's a lot of different variations and kind of ideal use cases, even for, very similar user personas. So trying to keep in mind, while like a loose understanding of the user persona or your target user with still kind of keeping in mind who they are. So for example, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so they're more so like they don't want you to go start narrow. They want you to start broad. Is that right? How you interpreting it?
Yeah, like broad but narrow at the same time. So you may have an understanding of who this target user is, but keep in mind that they're multifaceted, and not everyone, even within the same target user demographic, is going to kind of have the same use case. And so just trying to keep that in mind, that it still does need to be flexible enough to kind of not only support that kind of minimum viable segment, but also support a slightly larger group that might be a potential user.
Yeah, I wonder if this is more catered towards larger companies, like enterprise companies, because I feel like we've heard a lot in the startup world about, or early stage companies, about starting very narrow, like trying to find your minimal viable segment and then branching out after that once you find success within that segment. So
yeah, I think it can apply in both for like companies targeting startups or scale ups, as well as enterprise, because most first steps should have a very kind of narrow, most like MVPs, even if it's just like the MVP of a feature, should start relatively narrow. And I think that goes for both sizes. And it just requires that you keep in mind what the following steps for this feature would have to be in order to kind of address that larger market. So just staying flexible.
I agree with that. Yeah. Like always, like starting small, but always keeping in mind the bigger picture that you eventually want to get to.
Right. It's like, what is the minimum, viable, product here to satisfy, some user, and provide them with enough value to try it out, and that you can, collect feedback around and use that to kind of, further ideate and iterate upon that feature set. So next piece. Describe the need with an open question. For example, instead of "let's create a better calendar app to make user X more efficient," use the open question: how might we create more time in the day for user X?
I like it.
That's pretty good. Yeah, I think that's something that we could think of. Like we in a lot of cases like predefine how like the solution before we've even really discussed the problem space that we're trying to approach. So I think using the more open-ended questions to kind of frame the ideation process would be super helpful.
Yeah, I mean, even in like the user interviews we've done with customer and product people, we've heard a lot of frustrations when like people internally always present the product team with the solution rather than like what the need actually is to be solved. Like they say, hey, we need to do this, instead of, hey, is there a way to do this better? Like they're always prescribing the solution rather than asking like the open-ended question of how to do something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's our job to kind of think outside of the box, especially early on in the process of this conversation. So,
because if you prescribe a solution ahead of time, you kind of set the bias for the whole conversation, because everyone knows that you want it to be this way. And so you can kind of create some unnecessary tension sometimes when you present that solution, because it could come off where you're frustrated that you're not getting what you want or exactly how you thought about it if you're not open to change.
Yeah. And that's precisely what happened to us recently. I think we came into the conversation already set on exactly what feature we were going to build, without really kind of stepping back and thinking, okay, what are the steps it might take for us to get there from a dev perspective? Also, what is it going to be required to make this actually valuable in the long term? And so that required that we kind of thought a little bit more broadly.
Mm-hmm.
Step 3, initiate. So initiate is started by reviewing the ground rules for the brainstorm. In general, these are some good guidelines for an effective brainstorm. Defer judgment, encourage wild ideas, build on the ideas of others, one conversation at a time, yada, yada. You get it. This is all, stuff that I think we do pretty well.
Yeah.
At least I know I'm encouraged when I throw out my wild ideas.
Yeah, I think this one's more just about assume positive intent. Like everyone's on the same team. Everyone's trying to make the best solution possible. I think it's better when you throw out the wild ideas because it always sparks something else.
Right.
Like you can have a wild idea and it may not be really like viable or make sense in like the context we're talking about right now, but it also like, all right, that's the bigger picture we want to get to in the future. And then try to reverse engineer that wild idea. I think it's more useful to like make big bets and have these crazy ideas of how the feature should work, and then try to like rein it back into reality for the present.
Build on the ideas of others. Yep.
I think my career that way.
And that's totally fine. I think the biggest thing here to kind of like, this obviously sounds like really easy to do, but I think there's a level of comfort that you have to have within your product org. It has to be a collegial environment where everybody is obviously, pushed to think at a high level, but not feel uncomfortable sharing their ideas or thoughts. And that takes time. I think I've built that over time because I've worked with Keith and Jonah, our product leaders for, I just actually got my 5-year connected with Jonah notification on LinkedIn.
Oh, wow.
So I sent him one of those like pre-made LinkedIn kudos cards with like bagels on it. And it just says, thank you. And
he said, get out of here.
he had some choice words in response. But I know the love is there. But yeah, so I'm curious, like how long did it take for you, being relatively new around those two, to feel comfortable speaking up? Because I know at the beginning you were a little bit more kind of, you didn't speak up as often as you do now, obviously, in those product conversations.
Yeah, I think for me, it was more so me being more confident in product decisions. In his product ideas. I don't think it was necessarily me being uncomfortable speaking up in conversations with Jonah and Keith. It was just more so like me getting better at formulating my thoughts into actual ideas. Like I don't want to be a person that just says random stuff just to say it, and like the idea doesn't contribute to the conversation and you just want to hear yourself talk. And so that was my biggest thing. And when I first started, I was still like getting in the rounds of like thinking about new product ideas instead of just always taking orders from others or always taking ideas from others. And I think now doing so much product stuff in 2020 in general has really helped my development in terms of thinking of new product features, how to best help conversations when we're doing ideation and stuff like that. And I think that just comes from getting the reps in, from like learning outside of work, and also like always being involved in product stuff, doing QA, always talking to Keith and Jonah and yourself about new ideas. I think it just comes naturally as you get more confidence in your ability to do product stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. That makes a lot of sense. But I would also say, if you are new on a product team and you're put in this position and feel uncomfortable, I think there's still a lot of value from the voices of people who are slightly unfamiliar with the product space you're working in, I think you're coming at it from a less biased perspective. So, also keep that in mind. If you feel like everybody else in the conversation is coming from a background of much more knowledge in the space, there's still a lot of value that you can provide, just having that kind of malleable mindset that,
Right.
might have
Right.
at the time.
And if you are uncomfortable or don't want to speak up in like the larger conversations, I think it's probably useful to just send somebody a Slack message with your thoughts. Because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like sometimes I don't have the best ideas until after I sit on them. Like after the conversation's over and I'm just like going throughout my day, then like this is actually a good idea. And then like actually either writing that down to bring up the next conversation or just sending a Slack message or email, however you communicate internally with your teams about your idea you had.
Let it out, Cam. Just let it out. Step 4, we've got the thinking step. So this is broken up into 2 parts. Like I said, the first part is divergent thinking. And so they said to allot a third of the allotted time for this process. So it seems like steps 1 through 3 kind of breeze through. Those are almost like ground rules, but now we're in the thick of it. So here they say that the divergent thinking process is a process of rapid creation of random, unorganized, wild, free-flowing novel ideas in a short period of time. The method is used to think outside of the usual constraints and to get comfortable with ideas that may not be immediately valuable, but could provide the required novel ingredient in driving innovation.
Yeah, I like it. Is this done within the group or by yourself? I think
I
this is all
think
done within the group, right?
Yeah, it's all as a part of a group. So this is, I think, the initiate kind of are the ground rules for the thinking process. So I think divergent thinking is something that I'm great at. Throwing out ideas. Tangentially related to what we're doing in a lot of cases, but in some cases, it's right on the money and gets us thinking, gets the conversation steered in the right direction. I'm curious your thoughts on like our recent conversation, kind of where this divergent thinking process might have gone wrong, or like how it could have gone differently, and maybe made the decision making process a little bit more valuable.
I think maybe it may have gone wrong with us trying to do too many things in one screen. I think there is a hesitance to build a certain part of the functionality by the co-founders Keith and Jonah, who are CEO, and then also Jonah's the designer. I know they had a hesitance on building the certain functionality for forever up until like the last 2 months, and so I think that was part of it. How they wanted to steer away from that, but also kind of deliver some related value at the same time. And I think it was kind of causing some confusion in terms of what we actually wanted to do and how we wanted to deliver it. I think we were trying to do too much in just one view, as opposed to kind of just taking some inspiration from what is already out there in the market. Like, all right, they have different views of how they do these things. And I think that's helpful because it kind of sets your mind in a certain place to, all right, I'm going to do this thing on one screen. I'm going to do this thing on the next screen. I'm going to do the other thing on this screen, instead of trying to combine it all into one where you kind of get lost in the sauce.
Yeah, that's always going to be an issue, getting lost in the sauce. I think, we were prescribing a solution that we, as a team, I think were really excited about and had been thinking about. Kind of it had been at the top of our minds as the clear next step in kind of our product journey. And I think that's where we kind of that's kind of what drove the conversation, not the actual like ideation process during that call. We kind of, I think we skipped a step or two, in our minds
Right.
prior to starting the call, and that kind of the divergent thinking process was already kind of focused around this narrow view rather than this unorganized, free flowing pieces of information and kind of back and forth. So
Right. Yeah.
something.
I think for us, what probably went the most wrong was us not having a clear understanding of like the workflow involved and the end result. Like, I think we were just focused on like the middle ground of how things, like once you get there, this is what you do. Like we weren't thinking through like the entire system. All right, so this comes into the system, and then you eventually land it here, and then eventually go somewhere else. We were just focused on it being already in one place instead of the whole entire workflow and user story for this stuff.
And I think this process might be slightly different for early stage companies because we don't have the luxury of spending tons of time building new features, and or at least in the ideation process, like our magic kind of happens when we're able to build really quickly. And so we want to spend as little time I mean, I think like we try to spend as little time in the kind of ideation and design process, and try and get our engineering team as much work as possible so we can build quickly and grow. But I think that can also work against you when you kind of do not, when you don't think through a process, completely, and you end up actually having to spend extra cycles. We ended up building a prototype that may or may not be used, and that was ready to be handed off to engineering just about. So it's like a trade-off. Like you build more quickly, but in some cases you will spend time, working on a feature dud, I guess we would call it.
Yeah, thankfully we didn't build it though. So
Yeah, but
yeah, I
I
think
guess.
there's like a balance, right? I think you can spend a lot of time like thinking through like all of the different frameworks and the processes and how the whole ideation phase while also building quickly. And I think what we need to get better here at Parlor here is striking that balance, right? So we know we want to do this next pillar in Parlor next, right? But we should also start thinking of, all right, what's the pillar after that? So we can have conversations either weekly or biweekly or whatever the cadence can be. And so that we're spending the time for doing the reps of ideating the next pillar while also having stuff for our engineering team to work on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just requires organization. I think we have the thought process in place, and
Yeah, yeah.
the minds are there, but yeah.
It's got to be disciplined, man. That's what it's all about.
Mhm. Coach Cam coming at you live. So part two of the thinking process is convergent thinking. And this is another third of the allotted time should be spent on this. And so this is where you kind of get into the nitty gritty and start to take those wild, free flowing ideas. You start to figure out which ones make sense and you build on those. And in this process, you're starting to, use a selective critique on those few ideas in order to develop them into stronger concepts. So this method is used to build on the strength of the ideas when they're put together in combination, force new thinking and creativity around how new solutions can be made and differentiated. And then lastly here, you want to take kind of clusters of ideas from this process. And, you want to create clusters from this process. And I think like, taking like ideas and, pieces that kind of, form a solid story, and turn those into groups that you can kind of then take into the next step, which is the final step, synthesize. So, yeah.
Yeah, to me, I feel like this one is like the selective critique and the combination of ideas. It's like combining those wild ideas and like maybe like those features that you want to have built with like your product strategy. So if you use like the Google example, I think I'm saying this right. Hopefully I am. It's like it was like um, simple, fast, and powerful. I think those were the three words. So it's like, all right, they have this new idea this new feature they want to create. They have all these ideas. Which of those ideas tie really well with their product strategy?
Mm.
So it's
Yep.
like marrying the two together so that you're delivering what you really want to deliver instead of having some features that really don't fit within your product strategy and can kind of create like this jarring experience within your product. Where like some things are like simple, powerful, and fast, and other things are like a little slower. Maybe they're a little more flexible, and this kind of just creates that weird experience within your product.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that in this process, it's worthwhile to think about kind of like the dev constraints of the way that you're these ideas? Obviously, you always want to think about how things fit into your kind of like information architecture and whether or not these things are feasible. But is this a time when you want to start thinking kind of technically? What sort of requirements on the dev side are there?
I mean, I think when you're just doing ideation and trying to figure out like the best possible solution you can build, I think you should try to leave out the dev constraints or the technical limitations in this stage. And then once you actually have like the well-made feast of a product feature, and then that's when I think you sit down with the engineering team to see if what you even cooked up is feasible.
Mm. Yeah, I was thinking because a lot of times after this step, we would go straight into designing, designing a prototype, putting together some sort of mock-up in Figma. And, sometimes it might feel like that's too late once you get to an eng review. And, it appears that the mock-up or the prototype is a little bit, it's a bigger project than you'd expected or anticipated, that can create issues. But in a lot of cases, thanks to our amazing dev team, like we like to say, they'll figure it out.
Yes, they will. And then I think that's when you should empower those teams to push back. All right, this is way too complicated. But
Hmm.
if it's too complicated, how do we eventually get there? Like, how do we break it up into different phases or different versions to eventually work up into the full thing we want to get? And if the full thing we want to get to is like literally impossible, like how do we deliver the same thing but in a different way to make it possible?
Yeah. I think that's what our engineering managers have done a great job, and that includes you now, Cam, of kind of taking that prototype and starting to push back on the pieces that you know might not deserve space in V1 of the release. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and our side, I think us, as we're putting together these stories, like we're really good at staying flexible and hearing out the eng side and kind of reworking the acceptance criteria for that V1 in order for
Yeah.
it to kind of fit the constraints and the timeline. So I think that's a huge part of being a PM is kind of that flexibility, communication with the eng team, and also kind of being empathetic to both the users and kind of your kind of development capabilities in order to get
Right.
something of value out as quickly as
I mean,
possible.
the Inch team wants to build cool shit too, and we want to design cool shit. So I think like they don't want to say no, but sometimes they know they have to in order to protect the product and not break everything and cause a whole bunch of problems that they're the ones going to have to fix, and we're going to just have to be the ones to tell them to fix it, which is a kind of funny relationship we have with our good old developers.
Uh, yeah. I think it goes back to our like one of our values of assuming positive intent. Like if somebody on the dev side is pushing back on something, it's most likely not because they're lazy and don't enjoy that type of work.
Yeah,
It's probably maybe in some cases, but for the most part, it's probably them thinking from a business perspective whether or not it's something that's feasible. So
yeah,
I think
because
that's
if they build something that eventually breaks, like the blame is going to go on them and not on the product team.
right.
So it's
Um,
always like keeping that in mind because they do want to build all the cool stuff. They hate saying no as much as we hate hearing it's not technically possible. So
mhm, mhm. And so the last step that they have here, step number 5, synthesize. And this is another quarter of the, sorry, 1/3 of the time allotted. Those fractions are tiny. A third of the time is allotted for synthesis. So they break this into 2 steps, pick 3 of the strongest clusters and refine them by imagining the scenario of usage and the social and emotional attributes your target user would experience. And then draw 3 to 6 storyboards for each solution and annotate with user thinking and emotions. Consider your 3 ideas and move into prototyping or discard.
yeah, I really like this. I think for us in particular, we find a lot of stuff like workflow stuff and tweaks after the prototype has been made. And I feel like by doing like the storyboards in particular, or just annotating and imagining the workflows, I think we can maybe cut down on some of those tweaks we make after the designs have been made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be tough to pick, you know, three or choose specific ones. I think it's going to vary from feature to feature. Kind of the scope of something is hard to
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of try and approximate here. So I would keep that, kind of take that with a grain of salt. But I totally agree that you should kind of cluster them based on the intended solution and how you think they kind of play into supporting that or helping the users with that kind of pain point they're experiencing.
Yep, yep. I think that about does it for us today. We are running a tad late to our wonderful pipeline review.
Yeah, gotta keep those prospects coming in. So
Yep. And with that, we're always closing. So we'll see you next time.
wow, that was really good.
I'm getting better, man.